Listen, Brittany, I don't even know if I need to give you an intro, but I watch you all the time on MSNBC, where you are a contributor. I just love your passion that you talk with, and so I want everyone to know kind of how we got here, basically. And I want to start at the beginning because I know you were born in St. Louis, and you're a pastor's daughter, right?
I am. I am. You have
Tell
done
me
your
what
research.
that's like.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's so fantastic to talk to you. I'm a big fan, and I really appreciate how you are using your platform to have really broad conversations that our folks need to get into. So it's an honor to be here. Um, Growing up in St. Louis is, a mid-sized city with a small town feel, which means that everybody knows your business. And
Hey,
if
okay.
you are a PK, everybody for real knows your business. And then my mom is also a native of St. Louis, so she is also a minister. She became one later in life, but she was part of a fairly well-known family in kind of Black church circles, the Deloaches. And so, like, times three, everybody knew my business. St. Louis, pastor's kid, Gwendolyn Deloach's kid, everybody knows your business. But what that means is that people are looking out for you. And to this day, when I go home, when we're able to do that, or when I'm talking to folks from home, or, reaching out to people, they always say, I'm praying for you. And that means so much more than any, influencer box or, celebrity that might know your name. Like, when the people that know you and love you from before anybody ever knew your name outside of St. Louis take the time to call out your name to God, to our creator, to think about how you're doing and how they can support you and how they can keep you protected, that means the world to me. So I'm grateful for the ways that St. Louis raised me. And I'm grateful for two parents who raised myself and my brother Barrington to be really committed to justice for the long haul. Like, that is the family's business, period. So I really didn't have a choice to be anything but this, if we're honest. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so
honest.
you're surrounded by a power of prayer and a circle of prayer. I have the same thing with my family, so I agree that I think that that's why I am where I am. But you say you didn't really have a choice. So did young Brittany know that she was going to get a bachelor's in African American studies? Like, did you just know that that was going to be your path at Washington University? Like, what was young Brittany thinking?
It's so funny because in some ways I think I did. So my dad was an adjunct professor at the place that ended up being my alma mater, Washington University. My mom also got her master's in social work from that school. So WashU was always kind of in the family orbit. My dad also taught in the African American Studies department because he taught courses on Black liberation theology and the history of the Black church, not just as a religious institution, but an institution of social change. And so this was literally the curriculum that I was around all the time. And because both of my parents were working parents, you get picked up from school, you might end up in class with dad, you might end up in Bible study with mom, you might end up at, your own activities. So we were always busy. And because I was always with my parents wherever they were doing their work, it started to feel like the work I wanted to do too. So, I started doing what was called diversity work back in the day, but really was just justice work at my majority white private high school, really actually in middle school there. In the years earlier, I had been, out at protests with my parents, and I remember not seeing Black Santas in the mall one year, and my dad was like, what do you want to do about it? So we set up the protest. He made the contacts, like my
Black Santa.
His church members held signs. The news came out, and we got our Black Santas. So I think I learned at a pretty early age that you can witness the injustice that is relevant to your life. And Santa Claus was very relevant to my life at that point. And that you can actually, in an organized and disciplined and informed communal fashion, create change that may feel silly to some people, but that is actually substantive for a Black child walking around in this mall, making sure that the place where we're spending our money and the city that I'm growing up in looks like me everywhere I turn. So yeah, young Brittany was honestly always thinking about this. I was watching Eyes on the Prize.
Was about that action. I like
yeah. So yeah, this is what we've always been doing. I don't know any other like.
Okay, so let's fast forward past young Brittany. In 2014, you're the executive director of Teach for America. And that kind of leads you to the protest that's happening in your own city. And now these are not Santa Claus protests, these are real protests of the police.
Yeah.
Talk me through that situation of the progression now where you did go from, you got your first win young, and now you're on the real fronts, on the front
Yeah.
lines.
There was some stuff that happened in between that. When I was in college, a group of us co-founded something that we called the Student Worker Alliance, and we were able to organize for, alongside domestic workers on campus, able to organize for the first raise that many of them have gotten in years, and more livable wages. And I think that there were lots of kind of turning points along the way that set me up to be thinking more critically about how I use every platform I have for justice work. So I spent, like you said, years in education. And when Michael Brown Jr. was killed, I had to think about myself not only as a Black woman, not only as a Black St. Louisan, not only as somebody who lived 15 minutes from Ferguson, but also as somebody who led a program that placed teachers in the school where Michael Brown Jr. graduated from. So I was thinking about my responsibility as a civic leader, as a Black woman, as a citizen, and as Brian and Gwen's daughter and as Barrington's sister. Like if we were raised in this family business, then there was no other place to be but in the streets with thousands of other people who are continuing to get it done, right? Next to Kayla Reed and Michelle Higgins and Tef Poe and so many people who sacrificed so much to make sure that the world paid attention. And we know that Ferguson was a real turning point, not just for those of us who were engaging in this latest chapter of the struggle, because this struggle has gone on for generations, but it was also a turning point for the country and the world. People were not paying attention to the epidemic of police violence that continues to impact Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and has for a long time. John Lewis spoke to that at the March on Washington. This is in the 60s, right? Ida B. Wells spoke to that. This is decades before John Lewis. So this was not new, but it was our generation's turn and responsibility to take up the mantle. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have found myself in community with creative, brilliant, loving, beautiful, awesome people who have taught me so much about how to live up to my own values, how to evolve my values to be as liberatory and revolutionary as possible, how to learn in public and not worry about perfection, but worry about getting better and being better and evolving more every day. And people who just taught me what it means to be in struggle in love, right? That we weren't out there just because of what made us angry about the killing of Michael Brown, but we were also out there because we loved ourselves and our community and the young people coming up enough to say enough was enough.
Yeah, I love that. That is beautiful. And so Washington Post said you were heavily involved in planning and the coordination of a lot of the things that went on in Ferguson. Ferguson is a place, right? Because Ferguson is a repeat offender. Ferguson is a repeat offender. So it's actually a blessing that you are there in those spaces. Can you talk about just as Ferguson became that repeat offender and as you rose in the ranks? Because I mean, you don't get put on Obama's policing task force for anything. So just to put it out there, yes, she was on Obama's administration policing task force. You don't get there just by want to. Like, there was real planning involved. There was real coordinating involved. Can you just talk about being on the ground when things went down in Ferguson? What was the environment like? Like, what was it like there?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when they started to vet me for the task force, like the beginning of 2015, I told them, I said, if the expectation is that I stop protesting, then you should go find somebody else. Because my seat on that task force is to bring everybody with me, right? Like, I'm so St. Louis, as Nelly says, ask my tattoos. No, I don't have any tattoos. We'll work on that. But I'm like, these are my people. This is my community. And I am one of the thousands of voices that could occupy this seat. And so I'm going to make sure that, like Maya Angelou said, I may come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And so what we were seeing on the ground is so reflective, frankly, of what a lot of people saw, I think, finally with more truthful narratives this summer, during the protests around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Tony McDade and others. We saw a deeply militarized police presence in a residential area. So what I really want people to picture is like a suburban streets, wide suburban streets with lawns and trees and sidewalks and strip malls and convenience stores that and side streets that become neighborhoods, right? Where people are outside watering their lawn and their children are playing in the backyard and they're having barbecues. Like, you know, it was an inner ring, Ferguson rather is an inner ring suburb full of families. And in the middle of that, you've got tanks and armored vehicles that have machine guns mounted to the top of them that are literally just scanning the crowd. There's somebody standing on the top of that armored vehicle with their hand on that rifle, looking through the scope and just scanning you. There are officers in uniforms that range from a helmet and a billy club to full riot gear. And in the middle of all that, as the night starts to fall, the danger starts to come. Not because we as protesters are dangerous, but because the police are a danger to us. They're a danger to us when we're driving. They're a danger to us when we are living, sleeping, breathing. You know, you can look at so many of the people who have suffered police violence to know that all of that is true. And most certainly they are a danger to us when we are standing up in our First Amendment right. Doing the thing that supposedly patriots do when we stand up and demand what rightfully is our birthright. But if you do that in Black skin, you're considered a threat and a thug. So as the night would fall, there would start to be more activity from the police, more provocative activity, right? They're actually the ones who are most often escalating the situation. People are angry. They're yelling, right? They're chanting, right? Yeah. But they're also drumming, right? And they're also dancing. And they're also protesting in the way that I'm pretty sure the supposed founding fathers of this country did, because they too were protesters against the tyranny of England as they saw it. So we're out here exercising our First Amendment rights, and a warning would come over through the speaker of the armored vehicle saying, this is no longer a peaceful demonstration, you're ordered to disperse immediately. And not 2 seconds later would a hot metal flaming canister of tear gas be shot from that same armored vehicle.
Now let me stop you there. What at that point made them say it's no longer peaceful? Did anything you guys did change? Like, what made them, what made them say it was no longer peaceful? I'm just curious. I mean, I know the answer, but
yeah, Black skin made them say it was no longer peaceful. Because I mean, let's be really clear. You can look at what happened on January the 6th at the Capitol.
That's where I was going to. Yep.
The police know how to de-escalate. The police know how to not engage with people when they are angry. The police know how to not even engage with people who have weapons when those people have white skin. And these are not protesters. These are seditionists. These are insurrectionists. These are insurgents. These are white domestic terrorists. We are everyday folks trying to wake up, raise our families, go to work, put food on the table, go to church, and do it all over again. That's who we were. But we were considered to be more of a threat with some cardboard signs and some cell phones, right? And so yeah, that's all it took for them to shoot out the tear gas, the pepper spray, for them to, there's sound warfare that goes on with what are called MRAPs. So these ridiculous sounds that like give everybody migraines. So we were treated like enemy combatants. I for a while had a bruised lung because of tear gas I got a year later at a protest where the police had killed somebody else, because it is a chemical agent that can cause everything from infertility to respiratory issues. So yeah, that is what we were seeing on the ground. That's what I told President Obama every time I had audience with him. That is what that is, and that is what we are looking to fix, especially given how much this last administration has taken us backwards on these things.
And I'm glad you said that. Okay, so you had conversations with a President Barack Obama. What was that like? I mean, just growing up, we talked about little Brittany already, young Brittany, what
Right.
she was doing. Now, young Brittany's talking to the President of the United States. What is that like? What were those conversations like?
Honestly, I appreciate him because he is genuinely a listener. So he will sit there and take notes. There was one meeting that we had with him where we owed the White House a preliminary report. And it was clear he had read the report, and we sat down and he had notes for all of us and questions about the stuff he didn't understand. Very different from what we have experienced over the last 4 years, right? A level of competency and care and engagement, and that even if you don't agree with him all the time politically, there is an intention and a purpose that he operated with consistency that I always just deeply respected and still do. And there's also something that you have to steel yourself about when you walk in there to make sure that you just don't get starstruck.
Yeah.
Easy to be like, okay, so I've told this story a couple of places, but you're getting walked to the first meeting that I had with him was in the Oval Office. It was December of 2014. And a group of activists and organizers from around the country, a small group, we were invited to go and meet with him. And we had done so much preparation, right? We talked through our talking points. We really prepared because we didn't want to be overwhelmed by the moment and then fail at the job we were there to do, which was literally to speak truth to power. I know we say that all the time, but that was the moment that
you were talking to the commander-in-chief about speaking truth to power. Yeah.
Literally, they're like, this is the most powerful person in our country, and I'm here to speak truth directly to you.
Wow.
No filter, no in between, no go between, straight to you. Wow. So we we had to really prepare so we could meet the moment. And I had, in my previous parts of my career, had done some nonprofit lobbying work and some advocacy work. So I had meetings in certain places of the White House, but never the Oval Office. And I remembered that I shared with the Oval Office crew what I thought about the first time I ever took a meeting in the White House. It was to remind myself not to be intimidated in a building that our ancestors built for free. Like, this building is our birthright. So you can either be intimidated by the moment, or you can live up to a moment that our ancestors dreamed of, right? You can live up to a conversation that would not have been possible had it not been for their toil, not just in building the building, but for the generations of freedom work that they had to do to make sure that voices like ours could be heard and somebody like him could sit in the seat to hear us, right? So it was challenging and truthful and long. We were only supposed to meet with him for about a half an hour, and our meeting turned into almost 90 minutes because it was that intense. What? He asked us questions. We gave him a lot of the truth that we had been seeing. We made some demands, particularly around how much he would speak out about these things, because a lot of policing choices are made at the local level, but we needed him to use his bully pulpit even more to set the agenda. So we had some clear demands, and he gave us some advice from his own days as an organizer. And that was the first conversation. So every conversation after that, if you can imagine, just got more truthful, more and kind of more intent upon finding how we can bring some real change with immediacy.
Beautiful. I love that. Like, at a certain point, I would want to hear all of the stories, but I understand you've been doing this is a lot. So I'm like, I want to ask everything. So you go from America, we go from President Barack Obama to a dramatic difference and President Trump. Now, a lot of people are very surprised at what happened on January 6th, but anybody that's been paying attention has seen that energy is building. There was an energy growing. There was a hate growing. Yeah. Can you just talk about the differences that you saw in Ferguson and how to control a peacefully protesting crowd, and to what we saw happen on January 6th when this crowd was not peaceful, they were not protesting? Can you just talk about the dramatic differences and just seeing it from your bird's eye view?
Well, I think what's important for people to remember, we have talked, and also I think society has talked a great deal about the hypocrisy in the police response, right? And hopefully that should be painfully obvious to people. But this is the millionth example of that in American history. We watched how Dylann Roof was treated versus Black Lives Matter protesters. The examples and the hypocrisy have been there for a long time. But what I think is most important for people to remember about the difference are two things. One, what each group is there to do, and therefore, two, how each group is going to behave. Those of us who are fighting for racial justice are fighting to make the world more free. The insurgents that we saw on Capitol Hill are screaming and having a tantrum because they did not get their way, because they believe that their supremacy is being threatened. They don't want more freedom. They want freedom only for themselves. They want literal exclusion for the rest of us, right? So when that is your North Star versus freedom and liberation being your North Star, you are going to behave fundamentally differently. Anybody who has been to a protest for racial justice or climate justice, indigenous rights, any of the things that are about bringing more freedom to people, you see a level of community care, love, and support in that space. In so many of our nights of organizing, we would end by saying it is our duty to love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains, in the words of Assata Shakur. So we are orienting ourselves always to love, to support, to liberation, and to freedom. That is what we always come back down to. So what happens when you come out to one of our protests? People are passing you water. In the days of COVID-19, people are giving you masks and hand sanitizer. Yep. We are taking care of each other. You go and look at the footage from January 6th. These people are trampling over each other. Yeah. They are hurting one another. They are putting each other in harm's way, right? All of a sudden, blue lives stop mattering. All lives stop mattering. Their lives were the only ones who mattered. Because, and we have to be fundamentally clear, love and care is the central tenet of freedom movements. Violence is the central tenet of white supremacy. People were talking about it like it was an extreme, but violence is a tenet and a belief and a core function of white supremacy. Just like everyday poverty is violent, just like educational inequity is violent, so too is what we saw on January 6th. It was just a really obvious and extreme example of it, but it is rooted in the exact same thing. White supremacy itself is violent. And so the expressions of it are going to continuously be violent. And so that, to me, is the biggest difference that we saw. You see one movement that is built on love, care, freedom, and liberation, and another that is a temper tantrum for people who have always gotten their way, who are determined to make the rest of us bow to their will by any violent means necessary. The two are not comparable in any way, shape, or form when you really bring it down to brass tacks.
No, and I'm glad you said that, because you were born into this, like your family, you were nurtured into this. I'm new to the game. I'm 2020 new. My family, I already knew, but I'm talking about being on the front lines. And so I didn't even know what you just said, but my first instinct, one of the first things I did was I went and handed out water. The second thing I did was I threw a cookout. I threw a Juneteenth block party cookout. I'm like, look, all the protesters are already going to be there. I might as well bring food. So to your point, when you're doing something for a certain reason, natural things happen. Like I didn't even know that that just naturally happened in me to want to do that. And then when I went down there, I saw that, oh my goodness, everybody had the same idea. There was people handing out masks. There were other people handing out drinks and water. So to your point, that's how a certain movement should look when you're moving the right way. Now, I want to ask you about something, because the new administration, a lot of people, have trust issues, I would almost want to say. And so I get it. Yeah. Okay. And so what are your thoughts moving forward about the healing process? Can the new administration do that? What are your thoughts? There's a Kamala Harris that's going to be a woman. And I know that's a loaded question. There's a lot there. So feel free to pick it, whatever you like. But what are your thoughts moving forward, getting past this point?
I think that what always has to be our thought, no matter who's in office, no matter who's coming out of office, no matter what we've just been through, no matter what we're about to go through, the thing for us to always remember is that each of us has a role to play. And I know it sounds trite. I know that people say that all the time, and they put it on posters and they put it on Instagram, and you're supposed to just like it and move on. But it really does come down to that. Every successful social movement in history around the globe has, yes, had the charismatic leaders that we all see on posters. We just celebrated MLK Day, but there are also organizers, and there are writers, and there are scholars, and there are people who are feeding other folks, and there are people who are housing people, and there are folks who are acting as medics, and there are people who are doing the teaching. Everybody has a role if the movement is to be successful. The same is true about the moving forward of an entire country. We cannot sit on our hands and get comfortable again and act as though Joe and Kamala can do everything, because guess what? They are two people with, yes, a lot of power, but still limited power. Why? Because that power was intentionally limited in a democracy. The real power belongs to the people. So we set the agenda, we call the shots. Our tax dollars, our voices, our protests, our movements, that's what calls the shots. We have to be determined to be engaged at the local, the state, and the federal level. I think one of the things that has been beautiful about the last 4 years is that people have been stepping into their own power. So instead of looking to the leader of this movement or the chair of this board or the president of this organization to do all the work, they're saying, what's happening in my own community? What are the policing regulations in my zip code? What do the schools look like in my zip code? Is there time I can spend there? Is there talent I can offer? Is there treasure I can give to actually move forward on the policies that dictate my everyday life? At the state level, what are the voting regulations in my state? Are we a voter ID state? Are we a state that has great access to the ballot or limiting access to the ballot, right? Are we engaging in voter suppression like we've seen all over this country? At the national level, most certainly making your voice heard, because there are 100 days that everybody's focused on right now, and we should be focused on those. But there are hundreds of days after that we still need this Congress, this Supreme Court, and this White House to do what needs to be done to heal us from a pandemic, to help us heal our economy, to make real strides on racial justice, to make immediate and urgent strides on climate change. And that's just 4 of the issues that are in front of us right now. So we have to be as committed as we have ever been to make sure that the truth and accountability that has to come before we heal actually happens, and that the policy changes that need to exist so that people can experience love every day and not just hear us talk about it, that those things actually happen. So I understand if people have trust issues. I even understand if people love Joe Biden and Kamala Harris with all their heart. Wherever you are on the spectrum, you still have work to do. We each still have work to do.
I'm just going to end it with this. What are you optimistic about? Because a lot of people, I think optimism, a lot of people are saying, this is the same as before. And then there's people that are saying, no, this time is different. What are you optimistic about in 2021?
I really like to use the term disciplined hope, because I think that sometimes people get caught up with like hokey hope or optimism, and they think they're just supposed to be happy and excited with no critique, right? And I actually just don't think that that's fair to people. I'm not saying this is what you're saying. I just think sometimes people don't know what to do with the idea of being hopeful when it seems like there's no reason to be hopeful. But what I call disciplined hope is actually being glad that we know the scale of the problem, even if the problem is massive, so that we actually understand just how much work we have to do, and that we can also look to history and see just how much we've done before. And that doesn't mean that that has not come without great sacrifice or without great cost, because it's important to remember that while we're here talking, not everybody has survived the last 4 years. Not everybody has survived this pandemic. And we owe it to them to make sure that we keep our hand to the plow so we can look at the scale of the problem, we can look at the victories of the past and learn from them, and actually put those two things together and be unrelenting and determined in moving forward. So what gives me that kind of disciplined hope is looking at the people who helped us survive ridiculous times in history and helped us actually move forward out of them, right? If Harry could keep going, then so can I. If Ida B. Wells can keep going, then so can I. If the young people who are marching forward for climate justice and for to end environmental racism and to end racial injustice can keep going, then so can I. So my hope comes certainly from God, and it comes in everyday people who are deciding to take up the yoke that's theirs, and do the hardest work there is, which is to change the very ground beneath us. It is always work worth doing.
Disciplined hope. I love that. Like I'm gonna take that little nugget with me. Disciplined hope. I like that. I love that. Brittany, thank you for joining me on Remotely Renee. I feel like, look, you could be, it's in your blood. Like you could have preached to me. You taught me, you preached to me, you did all of that. I can feel all of the DNA in you coming out in the best way possible though, because it's the passion that gets people interested.